Hi there. It's September the 11th and we're continuing our voyage through Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. We're in chapter 12 and we're reading from verses 1 to 12. Paul has been weighing in against those who call themselves super apostles. They're a set of Jews. We're not quite sure what it is that they're teaching, but they're certainly denigrating Paul's ministry and accusing him of being not a real apostle. So Paul is doing some presentation, some testimony of his own ministry and his own life. And here at the beginning of chapter 12, he talks about the revelations and the visions that he's received. Now, he in a modest way, he describes himself in the third person singular. So he doesn't say it of himself, but he says, I know a man who 14 years ago was taken up to the third heaven. What Paul is describing here is an intensely personal, intensely amazing, wonderful, mystical experience. He's not sure if he was in his body or out of his body. It's rather akin to people who've had perhaps near-death experiences, who experience going into the presence of the Lord. They're not sure whether it's a body or an out-of-body experience, but whatever it is that Paul is experiencing here, he has amazing revelation, such depth of revelation that he doesn't feel able to share it. He says these are things that can't be spoken. He talks about being taken, in Greek he says isto paradison, into paradise. Paradise, that picture in the Hebrew mind of the Garden of Eden. In Hebrew this would be Gan Eden. This would be the Garden of Eden. He was taken into the place of perfect communion between man and God. That's what he's talking about here. And he says he was shown things there. And then he goes on with something really interesting, a real paradox, because he says so that he didn't get too puffed up, didn't get too carried away with his revelations and how amazing they were. God gave him, he says, a thorn in his side, a thorn in the flesh. Now, we don't know what that thorn is. No one can really say whether it's an illness, whether it's a set temptation, a besetting sin. We're not sure what it is, but it really troubled Paul, and he was called a messenger of Satan. So there's something evil about it, something that is thwarting Paul in his walk with God. And 3 times Paul asks the Lord to remove it. But the Lord says to him, no, my grace is sufficient for you. In Greek, archisi charismo. Archisi charismo. Archi means be content with. It's enough. It's sufficient. And Paul is saying here that I will therefore be glad in my weaknesses, because my weaknesses demonstrate how great Christ is. And of course he says, when I'm weak, in my weakness, then I'm strong. My strength lies not in my own power ability, but it lies in his power and ability. Archisi I charismo, my grace is sufficient for you. And so Paul presents out, this is him laying out all his testimonial, as it were, what he calls his boasting. And he says, I've worked among you the signs of an apostle in signs and wonders. This is what the apostolic role is for Paul. It's the anchoring earth to heaven. It's the bringing the heavenly perspective. It's not about wearing a big hat or having a position of authority. For Paul, the apostolic role is actually bringing heaven into earth, establishing colonies of heaven in the earth. And this he has sought to do among the Corinthians in the face of those who call themselves super apostles. When we are facing difficulties, when we're facing temptations, we just need to hang on to this truth that God's grace is sufficient for us. God's grace is so great, it covers everything past and future. Everything we will ever do in offense, everything we will ever do in our weakness against God is already covered by the power of the cross. He just asks us to continue to rely upon him, to come to him when we fail, when we let him down, to come to him and receive that forgiveness. It's an incredible gift of grace, but the same thing that is said to Paul is said to us. Be content with my grace, because my grace is enough for you. Have a very good September the 11th.